May 22nd, 2011. A massive multi-vortex EF5 tornado over a mile wide tore through the heart of Joplin, Missouri. In just 38 minutes, it erased entire neighborhoods, flipped semi-trucks like toys, and left a scar on Joplin, Missouri that it remains visible today. It was the deadliest tornado in over 60 years, claiming 161 lives. But as the sirens went silent, a strange story began to whisper through the ruins. A story that defies and challenges our understanding of the human spirit during trauma. In the days following the storm, a pattern emerged. Dozens of children, separated by miles with no way of communicating with each other, told their parents the exact same thing. As the wind tried to pull them away and the debris flew like shrapnel, they weren't alone. They talked about radiant, shimmering figures that they called the Butterfly People. They gave detailed accounts of being shielded by massive, colorful wings. Today, we're looking into the Joplin butterfly phenomenon. Is it a classic case of psychological trauma, a fraud created by the mind to cope with the unimaginable horror? Or is it a documented miracle that physically saved lives when survival seemed impossible? Let's head back to that humid Sunday afternoon in May and look at the path of the storm through the eyes of the survivors who claim they were never alone. When the sky turns a deep, concerning purple or green, and the barometric pressure drops fast enough to pop your eardrums, you're about to experience some horrifying weather. The EF5 tornado that leveled Joplin, Missouri on May 22nd, 2011 was an unmitigated horror, turning thousands of buildings into unrecognized splinters and piles of debris. But within the destruction was a narrative that was so bizarre that it transcended the local news cycle to become a piece of modern American mythology. Children who were pulled from the wreckage of flipped vehicles and flattened trailer parks consistently reported being shielded by massive glowing entities with colorful wings of butterflies. Looking into the story of the Butterfly People of Joplin reveals the desperate lengths our brains will go to protect itself from staring directly into the abyss. The tornado struck on a Sunday afternoon at the end of high school graduation ceremonies and as families were sitting down for Sunday dinner. At approximately 5:34 p.m., a multi-vortex tornado touched down just west of Joplin. Over the subsequent 38 minutes, the funnel expanded to a staggering maximum width of nearly 1 mile and ground a 21.6-mile path of absolute annihilation across Jasper and Newton counties. Mother Nature had essentially dropped a blender onto a town in the American Midwest. The storm reached a maximum EF5 rating on the enhanced Fujita scale, packing an official estimated winds of 225 to 250 miles per hour. To give you an idea, at these velocities, the rules of physics barely even apply. Blades of grass can be driven into tree trunks like steel nails. Vehicles become multi-ton airborne shrapnel. Entire residential blocks are scoured down to the foundational concrete. The human and economic toll was staggering. Over 160 people died, and there was approximately $2.8 billion in damage. And nowhere was this chaos more evident than at St. John's Medical Center. Jasper County is historically the most tornado-prone county in Missouri. Residents had grown desensitized to the tornado sirens, which led to many people to initially ignore the warnings. The storm hit St. John's. It was a direct blow. The E5 vortex shattered the hospital's windows, creating pressure that sucked x-ray machines, heavy medical equipment, and waiting room chairs into the void. Over a dozen people died in the hospital's walls alone, and the facility was damaged beyond repair. The immediate aftermath was like a war zone. Survivors navigating the rubble dodged live power lines and blood-splattered floors. Nurses and doctors were without power, and they were practicing blind triage in whatever structural nooks that survived the winds. The surreal horror of the evening was perhaps best captured by a Freeman Hospital West ER News Tracy Dye, who had been dispatched to the makeshift morgue to tag casualties. Walking through the lines of the presumed dead, she touched the arm of a man named Lage. In a scene ripped directly from a horror movie, the man let out a blood-curdling scream. He was still alive, buried among the corpses. And in this hellscape of screaming wind, flying asphalt, and darkness is where the glowing delicate wings first appeared. If the Butterfly People had been reported by a single toddler, the story would have been easily dismissed as a quirk, a kid who was just sort of imagining things during the horrifying stress. The mystery lies in the consistency of the accounts. The story echoed across the disaster zone. Children who had never met, who had attended different schools and came from various economical backgrounds, began detailing near identical encounters. They drew pictures of winged glowing creatures standing beside them as the vortex passed, and those pictures matched. Described as possessing the bright, colorful wings of butterflies. The adults present were bracing for impact, expecting to be crushed, while their children emerged unbothered, inquiring about the pretty creatures that seemingly bent the laws of physics to keep them safe. It's very hard to reconcile the brutality of a tornado with the gentle, almost whimsical imagery of the accounts of these children. An EF5 tornado strips the bark off oak trees and turns steel girders into pretzels. But a 4-year-old child was allegedly carried 6 miles by the wind and deposited without a single scratch, attributing the impossible to beautiful winged saviors. Naturally, people want an explanation. How does a community hallucinate a specific savior like this? Over the years, following the disaster, journalists, psychologists, and local historians have floated several theories to explain what the children of Joplin saw in the dark. So the first question is, well, is it possible that the children just simply saw actual butterflies caught in the storm? Missouri is positioned directly along the primary migratory path of the monarch butterfly. The massive North American movement of these butterflies originates in southern Canada and the northern United States, with the insects traveling thousands of miles to overwintering sites in central Mexico. The migration usually happens between September and November, and the spring return is between March and June. So there would have been heavy monarch butterfly activity in the region, depending on the temperature. Skeptic could point to this and say, well, the sheer terror of that day combined with these monarchs that had been disturbed by the tornado and adrenaline may have fueled these hallucinations. A lot of people believe that children saw actual butterflies whizzing by, and in the middle of their panic, their brains scaled up their insect size to think that these were people. But the physics of this is problematic, right? The sheer velocity of an EF5 tornado destroys steel and concrete. A delicate butterfly would be instantly pulverized by the debris-laden wind. Also, the witnesses described human-sized entities that wrapped them up or hovered directly over them, not just tiny insects hovering past. So it probably wasn't a swarm of monarch butterflies that formed some sort of coherent shield against a flying Buick. That's absurd. So what else could it have been? Joplin, Missouri sits within the American Bible Belt, a region that has high rates of religious observance, and Christianity is ingrained there. In this area, the idea of divine intervention is something that most of these people believe in. So when disaster strikes, maybe they were looking for angels. This is a soothing idea. But the question is the idea of a towering human with massive swan wings something that a child would recognize and understand? Religious commentators have suggested that something was occurring in the minds of the child survivors. Very young children may not have had the theological vocabulary to describe a divine presence protecting them, but they understood the concept of butterflies. If an entity appeared to comfort them, the child's brain may have simply dressed the entity in the most comforting, universally understood imagery available in their brains. So the classic guardian angel received a makeover. They were angel-like beings filtered through the innocent lens of a child. Now, if you're like me and you don't really believe in the divine intervention, there are psychological theories, one of which is the third man factor. The third man factor was a term made by researchers and popularized by the author John Geiger in his book, The Third Man Factor: Surviving the Impossible. The phenomenon describes a hallucination coping mechanism that is triggered in people facing traumatic death. The brain realizes that they are likely to die and that the current level of panic doesn't help. And so it essentially flips a switch. It projects an unseen presence, a third man, to offer comfort, guidance, and a sense of calm, allowing the individual to escape being paralyzed by fear. The most famous case of this happening occurred in May 1916. Polar explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton and his 2 companions were were exhausted and starving after their ship was crushed by Antarctic ice. Following a desperate 800-mile boat journey, they were forced to march a 36 grueling hours across the treacherous, unmapped glaciers of South Georgia Island to reach a whaling station. Later, all three men independently said that they had an undeniable feeling that a fourth entity had joined them, walking beside them through the whiteout and guiding them to safety. The third man factor has been documented among mountaineers stranded on Mount Everest, shipwreck survivors, combat soldiers, astronauts, and the survivors of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. It's an evolutionary survival story, a neurochemical that overrides terror. During the Joplin tornado, perhaps the children huddled in ditches and shattered bathtubs were experiencing the ultimate life or death sensory overload. The sudden appearance of the butterfly people may have been the human brain's desperate attempt to get beyond the moments of trauma, creating a hallucination of safety to keep the child calm and safe. But the third man factor explains how an individual child might have hallucinated this survivor. But how does that explain the sheer number of children reporting the exact same specific images? How does a whole town hallucinate the same thing? Shared or mass hallucinations isn't something that has been conclusively documented. However, mass hysteria are very real, particularly in post-disaster environments where the local population has been uprooted from their normalcy. Families were displaced, the power grid was destroyed, and people were crammed into hospital waiting rooms and lines for donated food. Memory isn't great. It's malleable. Individuals that are experiencing heightened sensitivity due to severe distress often interpret some experiences as supernatural. In Joplin, people with existing paranormal religious beliefs were candidates for these types of encounters. As the story of the mother and daughter saved by a butterfly whispered down the grapevine, it became a template. A child trying to piece together fragmented, terrifying memories of the storm might subconsciously adopt the butterfly because it provided a comforting explanation for their survival. It became a way for people to describe their trauma, a way for the devastated population to show that they had participated in a miracle. There is a darker theory, which involves parents shielding their children, and it's a disturbing theory surrounding the Joplin phenomenon because of the grim reality of this type of weather event. In an EF5 tornado, the human body is subjected to unimaginable force. People are thrown hundreds of yards, struck by high-velocity debris, and subject to catastrophic physical trauma. Some who have looked into the Joplin butterfly stories have beliefs that there is an unsettling theory about the wings. People believe that what children actually witnessed were the flayed airborne bodies of other victims caught in the vortex. The horrific trauma of bodies torn open by the wind, with internal organs exposed and clothing shredded into massive flaps, could momentarily mimic the silhouette of a winged creature flying through the air. Imagine a child screaming at the sight of a mangled human form hurtling towards their vehicle. The parent, trapped with the child and recognizing the type of damage this sight might be causing, makes the desperate decision to sanitize the horror, saying, "Don't look, honey. It's a butterfly person." This theory suggests that adults were essentially gaslighting their children to protect their sanity, replacing a traumatizing reality with a whimsical fairy tale. And once the storm passed, the children repeated the story. And the adults didn't want to correct them, to reintroduce the horror of what they actually saw. And they just allowed the myth to sort of go on and become the truth. In Joplin, the butterfly people quickly became a pillar of the city's recovery. Residents realized that rebuilding their infrastructure was only half the battle. The invisible wounds of the disaster required their own specialized care. Patrick Tuttle, the director of the Joplin Convention and Visitors Bureau, noticed that some survivors were too traumatized to talk about the event, but they could express their story through art. The butterfly became a symbol of metamorphic growth, change, and rebirth. It became the perfect municipal mascot for a city trying to emerge from a very dark cocoon. So there was a public green space built directly on the site where the ill-fated St. John's Regional Medical Center once stood. And instead of leaving it just an empty, barren reminder of the deaths that occurred there, the city commissioned a massive interactive public art site to reclaim the space. The centerpiece is called the Butterfly Effect, Dreams Take Flight mural. It's 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide, and the mural features a massive pair of butterfly wings designed to allow visitors to stand directly between them for photographs. The wings incorporate thousands of unique interlocking patterns designed to symbolize how the individual residents of the Joplin area were bound together to create a beautiful whole. When you hear about the butterfly people of Joplin, your instinct is to say, well, were they real or were they hallucination? But that question doesn't matter. Whether these butterfly people were literal butterfly people sent to the Midwest during a horrifying tornado, or a third man glitch fired off by a panicked brain facing near death, or a parent desperately trying to protect their child from visual horror, they saved the minds of the survivors. The May 2011 Joplin tornado was a horrific natural disaster. It took 160 lives, flattened over 4,000 homes, and inflicted billions in damages. It proved just how fragile human infrastructure is when subjected to the fury of nature. But the phenomenon of the butterfly people proved something profound about the human mind. When faced with a reality too horrific to process, the human mind will simply refuse to accept it. It will build a cocoon to shield itself from the wind. It will summon angels. It will paint giant wings. The butterfly people of Joplin stand as an undeniably real testament to the resilience, the creativity, and the desperate, beautiful hope of the human spirit in the face of absolute terrifying darkness. Please subscribe to this channel. Please like and share this video. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member of the channel. I appreciate you considering that. You can also support me by continuing to watch my videos, and I do appreciate you watching my videos. And please stay spooky.